This review copy of Slime-san was provided by publisher HeadUp Games. Ever since Super Meat Boy, I've always wanted to try another game like it. Something really difficult and densely packed with content that's still easy to get into. I keep hearing that Celeste is really good, but for now, I've been given the opportunity to try Slime-san, and it's just the kind of game I wanted. The story follows a slime monster and his bird friend who gets swallowed by a gigantic worm. The worm has such an insatiable appetite, and apparently has been on a ravenous rampage for so long that a society has formed and even flourished inside the worm's stomach. Thankfully, Slime-san has all the platforming skills necessary to escape and free everyone from the worm's belly. The player can explore the town and talk to some eccentric characters, but it's all completely optional. There's no real story to this game, and that's one of its major strengths. It hardly wastes the player's time. Even the loading screens are rapid fast, and the cutscenes never linger for longer than they're needed. Slime-san's goal is a simple one: get from point A to point B, and do it across 100 levels. You can also try to collect the bonus apples if you're daring, some of which are placed in extremely devious locations. Only 3 buttons are ever used, along with the directional pad. Slime-san can jump, dash, and phase through certain walls by what the game calls morphing. While Slime-san is morphing, time also slows down, which helps tremendously with pulling off some tighter maneuvers. However, there are many situations where morphing will cause the player to fall through platforms that they would otherwise need, rendering that slowdown ability useless in those particular situations. The game keeps the player on their toes by constantly throwing in a ton of traps like this, and nearly every level forces the player to learn how to deal with either a new obstacle or an old obstacle made more awkward. But it's often quick and easy to figure out what needs to be done, with just the execution being the hard part. This is thanks to Slime-san being an easy game to understand due to its art style of simple and contrasting colors. Anything that's white or green is harmless, although green can be passed through via morphing, and red is always deadly. This rule of colors is used creatively in different situations. Enemies will still act hostile regardless of their color, but they won't directly harm the player if they're green, and thus, these can act as platforms or as obstacles which can be passed through. The colors can even be changed and fine-tuned for personal preference, which can be a huge help for a game that relies on colors, and I always have respect for games with disability options like color blindness. The music is pretty good, but nothing spectacular. If you've seen some of my previous reviews, then you'll know how much I love to gush over good chiptune music, but this one's just not doing it for me. It doesn't quite stand as tall as Ninja Senki or Xenon Valkyrie. A couple of tracks are great, but most of it is totally forgettable, and some of the sound effects are incredibly grating. I'm not a big fan of the camera either, but it is bearable once you get used to it. The zoomed out camera shows off the entire level at once, while zoomed in allows the player to squeeze by tight spots that would otherwise be difficult to see. Both levels of zoom can be activated at any time, and they each need to be utilized depending on the situation. And while it is a neat game mechanic, it also feels strange in practice. I would imagine that this isn't nearly as big of a deal on PC with a monitor closer to your face, but it did feel odd to play on a television set from the couch since everything is so much smaller when zoomed out. I normally wouldn't point out individual enemies, but these guys were a source of major frustration. They're basically floating mines that explode when the player gets too close, and they're always in the way. Slime-san needs to get close enough to trigger the explosion and then get away before the explosion itself kills him. But that window of opportunity is incredibly tight, frustratingly so. Every level that features even one of these enemies automatically takes twice as long to complete just because they're there. And then the developer has the audacity to comprise some levels entirely of them. Oh, and I sure hope everyone loves screen shaking. There's an option to turn it off, but it doesn't seem to do anything at the moment. I would imagine that this is something simple that should be easily fixed very soon after the game launches, but keep in mind that it's not currently working in my pre-release version. The boss battles are extremely well designed, but keep in mind that none of them feature any checkpoints, except for the final boss in one of the included DLC packs. And, like the rest of the game, the player dies in one hit, forcing the entire level or the entire boss battle to be repeated from the start. This won't seem like a big deal for the first couple of bosses, which are pretty easy, but the more difficult ones are constant retries of trial and error. Unlike the normal levels, where everything is already laid out, boss battles are all about reacting and counterattacking. Each one repeats its own pattern, so the battle can be figured out eventually, but it also slows down the game's pacing considerably. I would rather have it as is than not at all, but I can't help but feel that this could have been better implemented. The level design is also consistently excellent. It's what drives the gameplay forward, and it's the biggest positive that I can give Slimeson. But then there's the occasionally questionable design decision as well, like a packed hallway that's difficult to fit through, or the slower moving water levels. None of it ruins the game, but some of the low points are definitely memorable for the wrong reasons. But to be honest, I'm really grasping at straws with these negatives, and the vast majority of the game is really good across a ton of levels. Aside from the original campaign of 100 levels, the 2 additional DLC packs are included as well, plus yet another 10 levels exclusive to this collection, which altogether adds about another 50 levels. The extra content doesn't only bump up the number of levels, but also presents brand new gameplay elements as well, such as this bouncy bubble power-up and a character that can change color, which, as I've already explained earlier, plays strongly into the game mechanics. I wouldn't be too tempted to continue if it were merely more of the same, but there are enough changes that I found it worth playing and thoroughly enjoyable. After completing each campaign, a New Game Plus mode is unlocked. It's essentially just a higher difficulty, keeping the same level layout, but adding more enemies and obstacles. And it's a great way to extend the game for those seeking a further challenge. Even without considering that, it took me about 17 hours to complete the game and get every collectible, except for completing the time challenges, which is definitely way too much for me. There's also a dedicated speedrun mode with several options that can be individually toggled, which is a great feature to support the more hardcore community. What you see is what you get with Slimeson. It's a rock-solid platformer that's easy to get started and hard as nails to finish. There's not much of a story here, the music isn't quite as strong as I would have liked, and in comparison to other retro games that I reviewed, this one feels like it's lacking in art style. But all of that is merely surface appeal. The core gameplay is where it's at, and it is good. If you're into simple but challenging gameplay, or if you just want a straight up spiritual successor to Super Meat Boy, then this one's a no-brainer. Slimeson still hasn't launched on the PlayStation Store, so I'm not entirely sure how much it'll go for, but $10 or $15 sounds like a perfectly fair price for this game. Thank you for watching my review on Slimeson, Superslime Edition. If you'd like to be updated on my future videos, you can subscribe to my YouTube channel, follow me on Twitter, or check out my page on OpenCritic.